Leadership means setting perfect examples. The leaders have the great responsibility to lead or guide their followers to the right direction. Krishna very emphatically told in Bhagavad Gita, Jad jad acharati shreshtas stattat evetaro jana sajat pramanam kurute lokastad anuvartate. As a shreshta, as a great man acts, accordingly the common man, common people follow. And whatever standard he establishes, that becomes the standard for all. So the leaders have the responsibility to be ideal in their examples. And if a leader himself doesn't follow, then he can't establish his authority. It'll be hypocritical, it'll be unfair. That's why it is very important that the leaders set the right example. And the Vaishnava world is the world of spiritual pursuit. There are two directions that one can actually choose for himself. One can either go for the material direction or one can go for the spiritual direction. When one goes into the material direction, he becomes degraded. Whereas when one follows the spiritual path, he elevates himself. And that elevation to the spiritual platform leads to the life of bliss, life of happiness, life of joy. So the leaders have the responsibility to direct people away from matter towards the lotus feet of Krishna. The difference between material and spiritual is where we put ourselves in the center, that is material. And when we put Krishna in the center, that is spiritual. Putting ourselves in the center means leading a life for our own sense gratification. Whereas leading a life, spiritual life, means to assume our actual identity as a servant of Krishna and serve Krishna for his pleasure. So that is the difference between material and spiritual life. So becoming a servant of Krishna. So the leader has a responsibility to become the ideal servant of Krishna. That is, being always concerned about how to please Krishna, how to provide everything for Krishna's enjoyment. Idam Krishnaya na mama. That is the essence of the spiritual understanding. Everything belongs to Krishna, therefore everything will be engaged in Krishna's service and nothing for me. But does it mean that then in Krishna consciousness they do not accept anything and they lead a life of total renunciation? No. That life is not a life of detachment. That is also a life of attachment. That attachment to serve Krishna and accept everything as Krishna's prasad, as Krishna's mercy. Devotees also enjoy, but devotees enjoy by being engaged in Krishna's service and receiving everything as Krishna's prasad. So the leaders have to be very, very careful. They have to be very concerned and cautious that they are setting the right examples. If they do not follow, if they do not act according to the standard, then they won't be able to establish their authority. The students, their followers, will not follow them with sincerity. They won't follow them wholeheartedly. So Krishna, when he decided to give Braja Prem to the living entities of this world, especially in the age of Kali, then Krishna decided to come as a devotee. Krishna considered that if I do not act myself, then I won't be able to teach. A teacher must act himself, and through his own examples, he should set the standard. He should teach them, teach his followers through his own examples. When Sanatana Goswami was discussing with Haridas Thakur, actually Chaitanya Mahaprabhu very distinctly, very clearly established that what an incredible mercy he was bestowing upon Sanatana Goswami. Then Haridas Thakur was praising Sanatana Goswami that you have received such a mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But then Sanatana Goswami started to glorify Haridas Thakur, and he told him that what Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to teach, he is teaching that through you. He came to distribute Krishna Prem, which is available through the chanting of the holy name, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu made you the Acharya of the holy name, Namacharya. And then he made a very wonderful point that you are a personality, you act and you preach. There are some people who preach but do not act. There are some individuals who act in a perfect way but do not preach. An ideal leader must display both the qualities. He must act himself, the standard, the tenets of the scriptures, and he must preach to others. So he pointed out that Achar Prachar Namen, there are two considerations, Achar and Prachar, and you are doing both, therefore you are an Acharya. So the ideal leader, according to the Vaishnava standard, is an Acharya because he acts what he preaches. That's the meaning of the word Acharya. The teacher who teaches by practicing it himself, he is the perfect Acharya. He is an ideal Acharya. And what is that process? The process is to spiritualize ourselves. Generally, we have a tendency to go towards the material direction, which means go towards sense gratification. Now, to reverse the process, we have to become simply engaged in Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness is not a process of negation. We are not saying that we won't do anything. But our process is, instead of doing anything for our sense gratification, we will do everything for Krishna's pleasure. And that is the responsibility that a leader has to teach to his followers. So, serve Krishna, how to depend upon Krishna, how to glorify Krishna, how to recognize how Krishna loves us, and how to love Krishna. These are the simple things that we have to understand and we have to practice. We simply have to act for the pleasure of Krishna, and we have to preach to the others about how to become engaged in serving Krishna. And when we do that, then the result will be there, the benefit will be there. And as I just pointed out, that if the leaders don't act by perfect demonstration, then their teachings will remain only theoretical. But to give it a perfect shape, there has to be the practical application. And an Acharya, a leader, a spiritual master, a spiritual guide, a spiritual teacher, has the responsibility to demonstrate through his own actions. Srila Prabhupada was very particular about the appropriate behavior of a preacher and a teacher. And he pointed out that inappropriate behavior of a missionary can jeopardize the entire mission. And in that respect, Prabhupada gave the example of one very popular spiritual leader at that time. His name was Bal Yogi, Guru Maharaj. He was to be called either as Bal Yogi or Guru Maharaj. He was a young man from Nepal, and he became very popular in the West. And once he came back to India, and he was carrying some precious items that he did not declare, and the customs caught him, and it was a big news everywhere that he had been caught smuggling things. And it went to the extent not only his reputation was jeopardized, but Indian government confiscated his passport. So that was the end of this person, although he was very popular in the West, but his career was completely destroyed simply due to one wrong action. So that's why a devotee's character and his behavior must be perfect. He should never act in such a way that can bring any kind of disgrace to his character. And that's why like Prabhupada was very particular, and it has been also mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita, that one dark spot in a white sheet of cloth stands out very, very vividly. So a devotee's character is like a white sheet of cloth. And we cannot allow any blemish to come into that, any black spot to come into that, because if it comes, then it will become magnified because of white, sparkling white background. And especially we are propagating the life of honesty, life of purity. Therefore, our activities must be perfectly pure, perfectly immaculate. And ultimately, it comes to the four regulative principles. A devotee must follow the four regulative principles. Like his eating habit must be perfect. He should never indulge in any kind of intoxication which will affect his consciousness. That is the reason why we should avoid intoxication. Because when one takes intoxication, his consciousness becomes blurred, his consciousness becomes affected, and he cannot think straight, he cannot think properly. But a devotee's consciousness must be perfectly tuned into Krishna's consciousness. But if one takes intoxication, then that will hamper that will thwart that. And a devotee his activities must be perfectly moral. He should never have any kind of illicit or immoral relationship with anybody, especially with opposite sex. Like in India, we see so many scandals about spiritual leaders indulging into illicit sex. And Prabhupada pointed out, they cannot avoid it because they do not have any higher taste. In the material platform, sex life is the highest pleasure. Now, unless and until one has a higher taste, he won't be able to give up his sex desire. Therefore, Krishna consciousness is the perfect way. And a devotee must be truthful. He should never tell a lie. He should never cheat. And he should never deceive anybody. So a teacher, a leader, has the responsibility to be very, very straightforward, upright, and honest. Because the responsibility of spreading the movement, the responsibility of spreading Krishna consciousness is lying on the shoulder of the leaders of Krishna consciousness movement. Therefore, their actions must be perfect, their actions must be immaculate. A community's expansion is unsustainable without Vaishnava Sadachar. See, a community of devotees when they move in a certain direction, then that becomes very, very exemplary for the progress of the movement. And now, who has the responsibility of leading the community of devotees? The leaders. And in that respect, Prabhupada gave a very beautiful example from Srimad Bhagavatam of Rantidev. Rantidev was an example of ideal detachment, an ideal selfless sacrifice. He performed fasting for 48 days. For 48 days he did not even take water, what to speak of food. And then he was about, after that long fasting, when he was about to break his fast, nice prasad was cooked for him to break his fast, but then a brahmana came and he said that he was hungry. So Rantidev gave his food. Then another person came. When he was just about to take some prasad, another person came. He said he was hungry. So he gave his prasad. He shared it with him. He kept some for himself and gave rest to him. Then a Chandal came. And he said that he wanted to. He was hungry. So he gave that prasad to him, whatever was left. And he thought, okay, now I'll just break my fast with some water. And at that time, one low-born person, a Chandal actually, came to him and said that he was very, very hungry. He was very thirsty. So Rantidev said, okay, take this water. So actually it was Lord Brahma and Shiva, and they all actually came to taste Rantidev, assuming the form of different personalities. And Rantidev actually was in this way demonstrated the perfect example of sacrifice. A person who is dying of hunger, he is ready to offer it to. A person who came asking for it. A person who is dying of thirst, whatever little water he had, he is prepared to give that water also to him. So this kind of sacrifice actually sets the standard. Only a Vaishnava can act in that way, because he has the perfect understanding that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the Supreme Controller. And whatever he is doing is for his pleasure. Like here, the Atithi, a guest is coming, asking for something. And a Vaishnava leader like Rantidev is seeing that he is actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is seeing the Lord in the heart of everyone. So when a person is approaching him, he is not seeing the external form of that person. He is simply seeing him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he is offering it to him. Whether it is a delicious plate of prasad or whether it is just a glass of water. Like when he is dying of hunger, when he is dying of thirst, after so many days of fasting, he is ready to offer it to him. So when the leaders set this kind of examples, the followers naturally become inspired by them. They become motivated by them to follow that standard, follow that example. And this is how, when there is an ideal leader, the community becomes ideal. Because following the example of the leaders, the followers develop those qualities. And they start to display those divine qualities, which are actually the gems of the Vaishnava behavior.